Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the last hour of Republica, so I appreciate that. So I'm going to get straight into it. So Control+S, saving our digital memories. How is a memory defined in 2024? Is it from the artifacts that we hold, that we see, that we touch, or is it the feeling that we get from having those artifacts? And with the rise of technology, how is memory changing? So these are some of the questions that we pose at Identity 2.0. As a creative studio, we work at the intersection of digital rights, identity, and technology. And we're excited to bring this talk to life at Republica and talk about some of the questions we probe in the work that we do. So during the next hour, we're going to explore what digital memories mean, how they've helped build our own personal digital archives. We'll look at how archiving is changing online and the ways digital tools are used to kind of help center on personal care. We will also examine legacies online, how they're created, and the implications that has for our future. So we're going to offer some new perspectives and how we can approach memory making in the digital age. We're going to try and leave some time for some questions as well. So I'm going to let Savina kick off.
Cool, thank you. So last year, a user shared this tweet on Twitter about how they wanted to set up an email address for their daughter since she was a baby. And they were going to use this as sort of a journal, a scrapbook, a kind of memory holder. And then at the end, when she's older, they will print it out and give all the tweets to her. It received well over 250,000 views, and the sentiments in the comments were really positive. People saying how lovely this was, it was cute, lots of crying emojis. But it really made both of us pause and reflect on what this tells us about memory. The way this person was looking at an inbox as a form of an archive, a forever pit into which he could safely store quite precious memories and moments that he'd want to share with his daughter when she came of age. But a lot could change in 20 years. What if he forgot his password? What if the web service doesn't exist anymore? Or if the way we access emails means that we can't print things out anymore? What if he passed away? How will his daughter be able to access these memories? So for this father, he's viewing emails as a digital tool he can rely on to safely store it. There's no kind of questions he's able to pose around it or be able to get these answers for. And also requires for this to be an ever-expanding digital world, not like a scrapbook which has a limited number of pages on it. He's viewing this as sort of ever-growing and ever more possible as his daughter grows older. Memory is one of the things that makes us human. How it influences our sense of identity is something people and philosophers and academics and dinner parties have been asking for years now. And to question the relationship between media and memory is not a new provocation, but something that we think we can approach in a slightly different way. Because how do the tools we've built today and used every day alter our understanding of memory? I've already seen a few people take out their phone, and that's something we're going to come on to soon, because that is a tool that we use and has shaped and is continuously shaping our memory. And going back to this example with the father, it's clear for this parent and many, technology is something that's safe. It's where we record things. We feel like we can store things there for the future, whether that's in text, emojis, it's on a digital device, and we rely on that to be a constant in our life. Whether we want that to remind us of someone's birthday or to play a song from time to time.
So it's undeniable. There has been a shift in how memories are being associated with what we have stored on our devices. So these are now what we call digital memories, and everyday communication kind of adds to that. So every like, every tweet, every message, every voice note is all archived for us to revisit on our devices. So whether we like it or not, the internet is a place where something can continue to exist long after it's been shared. When we look at traditional archiving, not everything makes the cut. There's people who are select few that are able to archive these things. Not everything is preserved. Things get lost in time. But when we're online, even in death, you are still able to find memories left by a person. We have created vast memory banks without even trying. And if something has become viral, it then exists in the minds of thousands of people, even if it is to be deleted. And a really good example of this is one of my favorite apps of all time, Vine. So Vine is an app that helped kind of pioneer short-term video content, to restricting its users to 6 seconds of footage. It was launched in 2013, and then it got discontinued in 2017. Vine was very popular throughout the 5 years it did exist, and it was really important in pop culture. Many videos became viral with people quoting what was in the Vines, even like till today. So what happens when a platform no longer existed? Some Vines were able to be preserved, they were uploaded onto YouTube, saved onto personal devices, to kind of be reshared between people onto other platforms. But some Vines just vanished, never to be watched again. The impact of Vines means that we still see people quote them in conversations and reference them in memes today, because it now exists in our collective memories. We have preserved and extended the content that is shared within 5 years to many, many more. This is the power of digital memories. They are often kind of a shared experience between many people. It passes borders, it passes time zones, and we're all connected at a piece of content that we all enjoyed. These digital memories can then build up our digital archives. But I think it's first kind of important to define what an archive is first. So traditionally, an archive is a place or a collection containing records, documents, or other materials of historical interest. But what if this place is online? And what constitutes as historical interest? I can argue that a viral video that shaped pop culture is of historical interest. But if these archives' place is online, then this opens up this space even more. I can say we all, like every single person in this room, has a digital archive of our own in some way. For example, I have an active email address that I've had for nearly 20 years now. So when I heard about the example and we saw what Savina shared earlier, I found it quite relatable. But unlike the father, I unintentionally created a memory bank for myself. I still use this email address till today, and it dates back to a time where I only had one use for this email address, and it was so I could contact family members that were not close to me and that lived far away. So this is what inboxes are designed to do, to send messages, to send information across to people. But now my inbox holds so many memories, and it captures how I've grown up in like a digital age. Even newsletter sign-ups that I've had at different times of my life, it can really kind of uncover my interests that I had as I was growing up. And sometimes if I have a spare moment or if I come across it, I do look back at these emails to reminisce. For many of us, we also have a social media presence too. And I would say this is another like place for us to consider. We create our profile with posts. We want to showcase places we've been to, food that we've eaten, people that we've met or seen. All of these things could be argued to be of historical interest to an individual person. And even more true when this person is already making their mark in history. For example, this could be a musician, it could be a politician. But without even noticing, we've kind of created our own personal digital archives online.
And I think one of the most present and obvious ways this has been created is through photographs. A friend of Identity 2.0's, Andrew Mallison, is the co-founder of Feminist Internet and argues incredibly passionately and better than I will do that the camera is one of the most important inventions in the history of humankind. And in many ways, I do agree with them. So shortly after the photography's invention, many technological advancements allowed photographic images to be adopted as memory aids. They became surrogates for direct observation and even trustworthy duplicates of important documents. So photographs can offer a glimpse into lives, into past lives, into long ago events, into forgotten places. They can help shape our understanding of culture, of history, of the people behind and in front of the lens. So photography has been utilized in these sorts of ways and perceived as a tool that is accurate, that is objective, and kind of really connected to real life. You often say that cameras are sort of a surrogate for the eyes because they can capture what we can see. But we know that generations of photographers also have taken a step back and said, this is just also my point of view. And so there's sort of a very interesting kind of connection here and a balance between how we view photographs as objective truth or as an art form as well. But now we all have access to cameras. It's in my pocket. It's literally in my pocket right now. And that is one of the ways in which we organize our view of the world. And there's been so much interesting discussion around what impact smartphones have on our attention, but I think there's lots of interesting discussion to have around what smartphones, and particularly the camera, has done to our memory. So in my personal experience, I have memories which have been shaped by a use of a camera. And so often I find myself looking back at videos I've taken at important events, and I question, do I have a memory of me recording the event, or am I remembering the video? And I think that's my point of view instead. That's two different experiences I've captured within one bit of footage, and I don't think I can actually distinguish between those two events. I think my memory is the thing I've captured within that video, but in reality it's me looking at my camera, looking at the event, and that's sort of another lens in which I'm viewing the world through. I don't think my brain has quite caught up with the fact that I'm looking at this through a lens. On the other hand, in some exhibitions that we've made and we've produced, we create certain moments which are more photographical, that are dubbed to be a social moment because we want people to take photos of that. We also discovered, as walking around today, there are certain pieces which are definitely probably designed to evoke you to get your camera out and to take a photo of it. That's how it's expected to be experienced. And then we have to question, is that how we want to remember the world? Is that how we want to be remembering these experiences? Because some strong memories are based on attention. They're formed by having lots of connections in one's brain. So the more connections in your brain, the stronger a memory is. And in many cases, scientists have found that photo taking can maybe diminish our ability to recall and remember these experiences. And I'm going to give you an example of a research that was done recently. So at the Stanford Memorial Church is a beautiful building. It's stunning. It has these huge murals inside. There's like mosaics, stained glass windows, incredible paintings of angels and saints. Essentially, it's incredible. But a researcher wanted to find out if that was still the case with a camera in your hand. So in a series of experiments, a few hundred participants took a self-guided tour through the church. On the tour, the participants were supposed to be making notes of particular details. So, for example, the shape of certain crucifixions and where they kind of were embellished or not. Or they were saying around certain bronze angels that greeted you at the doors. Some of these participants were given an iPod equipped with cameras and were instructed to take photos, either to print out later or to post on Facebook. Other participants went in empty-handed. A week after the tour, the participants were given a surprise quiz and about these details that they were supposed to learn on this tour. And those who had a camera got around 7 out of 10. And those who had those without a camera scored 7 out of 10. Those with a camera scored around 6 out of 10. So it's a small difference, but it was enough that the researchers deemed that this was a significant difference. And Emma Templeton, who was the psychological researcher who co-authored the study, explains that they thought that the photos in general decreased their scores in the memory test because the cameras were a distraction. If we say memory is based on attention, then your camera is an additional thing that could stimulate your attention. And so then, therefore, they're paying attention to the camera and not the experience itself. So you don't really remember what you're supposed to be paying attention to. And then she kind of goes on to explore how, well, what would life mean when we constantly have this distraction in our hand? What's this doing to our idea of memory? And this instant access to now not only our photos, but maybe a shared album of everyone who went on this tour, and I now have access to all their memories and the way they viewed this as well, kind of distorts your own as well, and you sort of adopt other people's memories as you take in theirs too. But how much do we want our phones and cameras to remember for us? How much do we want digital devices to be those vessels in which we pour our memories in, or which they shape our memories? And I feel like this is something we talk about this all the time, and probably everyone has had feelings around, ooh, what's my phone doing to me? Do I like this relationship I have with my phone? And it's a really complicated one that I don't think we're going to be able to solve within this talk or within any sessions. But I think it's one that we should be constantly pushing back against, especially in a society which is priming us to use technology more and more and more. And so maybe we need some more nuance in this, because there are other studies where participants are asked to take photos or not take photos during a museum audio tour. And when instructed to take photos of the exhibition, participants were more likely to remember visual aspects. They were able to remember smaller details that those who didn't take photos weren't able to remember. But the trade-off was that those who did take photos couldn't remember the audio tour. So then again, their attention was focused on the visual aspect of their experience and not their audio aspect of the experience. And so then I think this is like an interesting part where we can talk about photos as purely visual memories. We bring loads to our photos. We bring loads to the digital media that we experience. But on paper, those photos that we take are just visual memories. So when we're focused on the camera, we're more likely to ignore other senses or other stimuli. And then what gets ignored doesn't get remembered. But it's important to also remember, when you take a photo, your phone stores a lot more information than you probably intend it to. There's the metadata behind the scenes, there's the date, there's the location. Sometimes your phone even wants to track and says, oh, this is definitely Ada Awais in this photo. And it does that without you really knowing sometimes, without you consenting, or without you really paying attention to it. So there's a whole digital version of ourselves out there which is being formed online without our knowledge. And how does that get to live, and how is that being experienced when it forms such a key part of our online experiences? It shapes what our algorithms are like on social media. It shapes the adverts that we get served annoyingly all the time. So not only are we forming our own memories online, but the digital is remembering us. Even socially, having digital memories far widely circulated more than ever before, people you'll meet online will also be trying to dissect your memories in ways you might not be comfortable with. Sorry. Okay. So with the constant recording of oneself, it's worth thinking about what this does to our perception of memory. How do we think about memory today? So Professor Andrew Hoskins talks about the fetishization of total absolute memory. So this is the desire. So absolute memory is the desire to have a clear record of what your memory is. So a photo represents the experience, that's my memory. Whereas voluntary memory is what we've lived with for years. Our brain is full of voluntary memories that surface at moments of surprise. This could be a smell in the gym, which reminds you of your ex. It could be a song playing abroad, and it reminds you of home. Our human kind of pre-tech memory is one of surprising connections. And Hoskins brilliantly mentions Ratatouille as a great example of what voluntary memory can make. So the ending, sorry, I'm spoiling Ratatouille for people, but it has been out for a while, so I hope that's okay. You can come find me later if you want to complain about that. But the ending of Ratatouille is the food critic goes to the restaurant, it's a big deal, but the dish he served takes him back to when he was younger and reminds him of something his grandma used to cook for him, and reminds him of why he became a food critic to begin with. Now, that is a voluntary memory, and I think the ending of that movie would be very different if that memory was only ever based on a photo that he took of the meal. So memory is something that's ever-changing. The memories of that food critic now may be altered thanks to this new experience. It's building on a past memory. And time and circumstance can play a big part too. A memory of a concept might change if you broke up with the person that you went to with it. And as memory changes, how you imagine and remember it and interpret it could also change. And so how does that change when we have concrete evidence in our hands, when a photograph is in our hands, but how we feel about it changes? And there's no technology yet which can really kind of capture that complicated relationship. That's all still how we negotiate with it. And so we have access now to this personal memory bank. As Ada said, we are creating our own personal archives. And so we're sort of shifting what memory is now. It's no longer a purely human endeavor. It's one that coexists with technology and exists back, and it kind of speaks back to us as well. The phrase photo or it didn't happen is like very common knowledge now. But now as we're researching this, feels like more of a threat than anything else. And we have this desire to document our lives, to become a personal archivist. It's encouraged for us to do it. And so do we want technology to change as our memories do, or are we comfortable with it being quite a subjective kind of record in that moment? So what becomes more important, the record of it or our feelings towards it? And because a lot of technology was never designed to hold our memories, they're advertising platforms or service providers. Yet, as memory is a core part of who we are, we've leveraged this technology and made it into spaces for us.
Okay. So, as Sabina just said, we've leveraged that space and we've created it, right? So, social media has been like a core part of how we've kind of shifted our relationship with memories. I find it interesting because there's also other information that is there in our accounts that we haven't curated, like all the metadata Sabina said, like the location data, the time spent on the app, what type of content we engage with, that like feed our algorithms. But then there's also this kind of like societal pressure that comes with these accounts. Like you said, like if you didn't have a picture, it didn't exist, right? And people are more cautious to what to post, or what's the best thing to post. Really thinking about how aesthetic their feed is going to be. Or certain things might not make the cut because it didn't suit that aesthetic. So this is when we see kind of people also create their own spaces for themselves online. Things that they want to share that they feel like they wouldn't share on their main account with lots of people, or maybe it's too personal. This could manifest in different ways. It could be people using a Dropbox or a Google account to kind of share memories with family, upload their pictures there. I've also seen like unlisted YouTube links to share wedding videos for families that don't live abroad. So like it's not searchable on YouTube, but it exists on that platform. And most recently, we're seeing people create something called Finstagram. So this is kind of a private social media account that people use to post about their lives more freely and without the pressure of like getting it right or kind of submitting to metrics that these platforms are based on. They are creating their digital personal archives that center care and curating, and then care and reminiscing too. These spaces are created for their own enjoyment rather than anything else. And if you speak to people who create Finstagrams, they often express they do it as a way to archive their memories. So they're very like aware that that's what they're doing. And they find it as a place that can be more forgiving and free to be themselves completely, because usually these accounts have a low number of followers. It's like mainly close family or friends, and this level of privacy centers you back into your own historical importance. They are intentionally creating a personal archive for themselves digitally. They see the power on how to do this, and they do it for themselves more than anything else. Then comes a question about the longevity of these platforms and how our personal digital archives will be preserved for us. As I said earlier, even in death, our accounts will still be online. People think this is a good thing, some people think this is a bad thing. You could argue for both. But when social media platforms were first designed, they weren't designed to become an extension of our memories. They weren't designed with the consideration of death. Usually these platforms were designed by young people, for young people. And death is not really something at the forefront of a 20 to 30-year-old person's mind. And what happened is social media boomed, everybody went on it, and then people died. That's like a pretty normal thing. We all know that's going to happen. And then loved ones were left behind with like these accounts of people that became deceased, and they didn't know what to do with it. This could kind of go, I think it's just touching my face. Okay. This could go two ways. So the first way is people want to preserve these accounts forever. But really, that's just how long they live. And they want to have that account because they feel connected to that account. They want to be able to revisit it, look at the posts that they did, look at the pictures that this person has posted, and kind of feel like this person is somehow still with them. And then the other way it could go is people are triggered. They are reminded of a birthday of a loved one who's no longer with them. You kind of get this eerie feeling when you're seeing their account. So they have kind of, as these social media platforms have been here for a while now, there have been like some solutions to kind of combat this. So, for example, Facebook, or maybe I should call it Meta now, you can create a memorial page for an account for someone who's passed away. So this is kind of like how it used to look. You have to contact them, you have to show proof of death, and then that page becomes a memorial page. It has features like remembering on there. Loved ones can kind of post onto their timeline. There won't be any birthday reminders. No one will see this in the like people you know section. It won't be publicly available. You have to kind of specifically search for it. Facebook also allows you now to kind of do a legacy contact. So you have to kind of go into your settings and you appoint someone to manage your account if you were to pass away. So this could be creating the memorial page, but this could also be removing your account completely. But this shows us how much our memories are intertwined with like our online platforms. There was a study from Oxford Internet Institute that predicted by 2070 there'll be more dead people on Facebook than living. And then there was a huge call for like the history to be preserved and that it can't be under a big tech for-profit organization. Like archivists and historians should be invited to Facebook to kind of shape how to, manage these legacies. Personally, and Serena knows this, I do not want to be a profile in a digital graveyard. Like, that is not what I want for myself. And maybe Facebook's not the best example because of how huge they are, but what happens if they just disappear like Vine? And where did all of these kind of memorial accounts go? There have been kind of a few startups that look at digital estates. So this is kind of like how someone can transfer ownership to their online assets. So this could be like putting all your passwords to your online accounts into this digital estate. So if you were to pass away, people can kind of access it and do that. But it also goes beyond that to like appointing someone to have your Bitcoin or to have your NFTs, kind of like the same way a traditional will works, but for digital assets. But these same startups also die, so they'll come out with a promise of preserving your digital assets and your digital identities. They'll have lots of investments, they're booming, and then the investor pulls out and they no longer exist. And what happened to your digital estate now? There is a book written by Tamara Nisi, which was published, I think, last year. It's called Death Glitch, and it actually explores the concept of death online, and it goes into digital estates in a lot more detail. So if you're interested in that, I would suggest getting the book or the audiobook. I personally find the conversation of death online really interesting, and I always have. It's because it's the one thing that we actually have no control over. We spend all of this time on our online accounts and creating these spaces, but they're not the same as like physical assets that you can pass down. These same platforms we've poured our memories into, they're not really ours to keep. And then online profiles and online accounts and archiving also goes beyond an individual. It also like looks at communities as well. And communities use this same tools to archive their stories. But the difference is a little bit different, where you need a memorial account because it's a community of people who are curating this space. So It's not one individual life story. So I wanted to share some examples. I follow an Instagram account called Somali Architecture. This account shows like old images of Somalia before the civil war. And sometimes they even have like some really cool 3D renders of towns and roads of how Somalia looked in the 80s. You can send your own images to the account. It's managed by a group of people. And its kind of goal is to preserve the history of Somali's architecture and Somalia's history. For many people of the diaspora, like myself, whose parents or grandparents fled the war from Somalia, they've grown up elsewhere. So they don't really have that history to see. And a lot of these images from Somalia come out kind of showing famine or broken cities. So this account gives a glimpse to Somalia's rich history and its stories and how it can continue to live on. Another example that I've seen is an interactive website called Queering the Map. So this is a community platform. It digitally archives like queer experiences in relation to physical spaces. So from park benches to the middle of the ocean, the aim of this project is kind of to preserve queer histories and their realities. The website holds hundreds, literally, like if you go on the website, there's so many pin dots. Like I was overwhelmed when I first saw it. It holds hundreds of stories from like love, from joy, from sadness, from pain. People are encouraged to kind of submit their own story, and it states, if it counts to you, then it counts to Queering the Map. The project works to connect queer people from across borders, sharing similar stories, and revealing the ways they are like intimately connected. A physical space holds so much memories, but for Queering the Map, it's also a way that kind of points out the limitations on how the world is produced and normalized for certain bodies and not theirs. It's a way for them to put their mark on that space and share their own story. So people are using the tool, sorry, something's in my eye. Okay. People are using kind of tools we have to create spaces where their history can be shared and preserved. And if you think about it, if you come from a community where your history isn't as widely documented, to have that space and to even add to that space would kind of feel liberating. It's interesting to see how groups of people come together and kind of benefit from these spaces that we have online as well. These tools were never designed, like we've said this a few times, they were never designed with the intention to be our personal archives or community archives, but we've kind of leveraged them to do exactly just that.
So, as discussed, people can create their own digital care spaces despite their limited infrastructure. We can find moments of liberation in Web3's capitalistic entrapment. And we can view these spaces like emails and YouTube and all sorts of kind of websites that we've just shared as well. But we could also think of these things as time traps. So, as discussed, what happens if a company would cease to exist? And what about if a space just simply changes how it's run? A key example of this is Elon Musk's leadership of X or Twitter, however you want to say it. No one really cares anymore. Many online tools used archiving tweets. They kind of use certain tools as well to be able to access the Twitter or X's API, such as Tweet. Which monitored and archived the accounts of over 1,000 politicians and important figures. But this no longer functions as the cost of Twitter's API changed last year. Now, these were used by academics, journalists, archivists to systematically, verifiably archive nearly 1 million deleted tweets. And as a result, as this tool is no longer available and no longer functional, archivists now have to rely on screenshots, which could be faked, which also could just be of deleted tweets, and no one happened to get a screenshot of it. And so it's a much more arduous and less efficient process. And this change has already had consequences for archivists who are struggling to record important details about the Gaza conflict. The Internet Archive is another example of an amazing kind of initiative to combat the way that we're saving things online. They have a digital collection of over 7 million books, nearly 15 million audio files, and a searchable database of over 735 billion web pages. It regularly indexes the web, allowing users to access sites month by month, including those that have disappeared or dramatically changed. Unfortunately, the Internet Archive's public library of media is facing lawsuits from the publishing and music industry, which may have consequences for the future of copyright and media online. And copyright is a whole other talk we could do. We don't have time to go into that right now. But the Internet Archive is still a physical space. It's located in California town of Richmond, just 20-minute drive down from San Francisco, and visitors can tour the facilities and see its operations, including the many, many servers which store the Internet Archives. Even modern-day entertainment, which, with the decline of physical media and over-reliance on streaming, people sometimes struggle to access films or TV shows that you could have once owned. This goes beyond simple nostalgia, but there is a reliability in owning media. There's something physical and tangible that someone can't take away from you or can't alter once it's in your hand. And so when we talk about these things online, it's often feel like we're talking in metaphors. The internet is a forever expanding place and things are stored in the cloud, but as the phrase goes, the cloud is just someone else's computer. This means every time we upload things to an online storage space, when we send a photo in WhatsApp, when you make a Google Doc about an interesting talk you're going to do, they are stored somewhere, and that somewhere probably looks like this. These are sort of huge server rooms. Their cloud spaces exist on individual servers found at data centers and server farms worldwide. Now, data centers and collection kind of provide the space for all this sort of cloud computing that needs to go on. And as we mentioned, what happens when these companies cease to exist? Well, the server room they were renting just sort of goes to someone else. And so whilst the internet feels like, you know, something we talk about in very excitable terms, realistically, it's just that, which is a very odd thing to get your head around sometimes. It's just a bunch of hardware. And so while technology has transformed our idea of memory, the physical storage space of at the beginning, the example of someone's inbox being their archive, no longer are they saving it in the scrapbook that they own, they're saving it on somewhere else in a cloud, in a room far, far away, which very, very few people will ever get to see. And I think it's worth taking a closer look at physical spaces like this to find out more about how they operate. And so whilst they seem like an endless cascade of server flashing lights and interconnecting wires, there's actually 600 hyperscale data centers around the world. These are ones which have more than 5,000 servers. Around 39% of them are in the US, whilst China, Japan, UK, Germany, and Australia account for 30%, the other 30%, and then the rest are somewhere else. And that right there is sort of where all these precious memories are being stored, where all the collective and the care that we put into it are being saved. But because it is a physical structure, it has physical constraints. There's only so many resources that can be supplied to create it. There's only so much land we have to be able to hold spaces like this. And there's huge environmental consequences of running a data center too. It's estimated that they consume around 3% of the global electric supply and account for around 2% of total CO2 emissions, which is the same as the entire airline industry. Producing that much energy is going to be hot work too. Apparently, though, if you visit the Internet Archive, the founder says they don't have enough money for hot air conditioning, so if it gets hot, they open the windows. But that's not the case with most data centers. Most data centers actually have immense water consumption. A single data center can use the power equivalent to a small city and require an extremely large amount of water to keep it cool. For example, a data center in the USA could use 360,000 gallons of water per day, if not more, just to be able to keep it cool. And so when we're talking about all the exciting things that can happen with memories and digital spaces, it's really worth considering if this is a sustainable way to be thinking about the future of our archives.
Yeah. So I want to just bring us into like, what can we do about our legacies then? We are creating these things online. So, a recent example, I say recent, but I think it came out like last year, is kind of from this studio called Modern. They're a design and innovation studio that's kind of researched this topic. They state, we entrust our most intimate memories to the cloud, yet we will probably outlive our storage providers. They kind of went through conceptual design, and they offered a solution to this, which is kind of like an heirloom. So heirlooms is called an heirloom. Heirlooms are traditionally passed down through generations. They hold stories about a family lineage, and it's kind of like how we have traditionally passed down our memories. So what they've explored is kind of this like small hard drive that's embedded within a necklace. So it takes advantage of that human tendency we have to hang on to sentimental objects and the behavior we already possess. So handing down something to your children and hoping your children will do that to your grandchildren and continuing on. Not entrusting the cloud kind of helps us to protect our digital memories, but hard drives can also have their disadvantages. For example, floppy disks were, widely used in the 90s, but finding a computer to be able to access a file on a floppy disk is very, very difficult nowadays. So how can we be for sure that the technology that we have now, we can access them in the future? I do think kind of having physical storage is an interesting approach to personal digital archives and a way to kind of preserve our memories in a way to like prioritize self-care. So it gives us a limitation as well, like we only have so much storage on something. So we have to kind of pick and choose what holds the most historical interest to us and what we want to pass down. So now that place of an archive I was talking about earlier would kind of like dangle on our necks. But this is only one solution. We need so much more to be able to combat the chances of losing our memories in this kind of like digital abyss. Interestingly, there has been a boom in the market of creating traditional photo books. So printing pictures, preserving them in a way that's been done for generations before us. But then it makes me think like, okay, but what about the videos and what about the voice notes that we cherish too and we reminisce on? So right now, the future of archiving kind of looks like a battle between cloud-based or kind of like physical storage spaces. But I don't think those two options are enough. So how do we as a collective want to access and store our memories? And how do we design a way so that in like 10, 20, or 30 years' time, we can revisit these personal archives that we're creating?
Yeah, so each day on Earth, we generate a lot. And this is an example of some of the things we're able just to make on planet Earth. It's a lot. And as we've demonstrated, this is more than just data, or this is more than content. It's often memories, experiences. These are shaping our identity every day. And we don't think it should be down to a few in Silicon Valley or, King's Cross, London, to decide what is saved for the rest of history. So how do we come to terms with things being lost too? Who decides what constitutes an archive as a community space, and all these different definitions we are coming up with as well? We don't have the answer to this, and we think this is something that more people need to probe and question at, and we hope that we might just be able to spark conversations about it. Because we're producing so much content, and whoever decides what gets to be stored will ultimately be the people in power. And I do believe people will continue to create spaces out of care and community. This impulse to remember and be remembered won't fade away, even as the technologies will vastly change over the next 10 years. But so does the needs of the planet and people too. So what if digital spaces started with these ideas at the center? If we started to think about digital spaces as individual spaces of care and comfort to remember us and our communities that we love, what would they look like? Who would be involved? And how would that affect our idea of memory in the future? Earlier, I spoke about the invent of the camera, but how would you store other senses? Because a memory could be a smell, the sound of laughter, your feet being dipped into the pool. So should we really be allowing technology to store those moments for us as well?
So what do we see the future of memories to be? As Savina said, we don't know. We're not here to answer that question, but we would love to kind of hear what you think. So we're going to end in a Q&A in a second, but we just have a couple of provocations for you guys before we end.
So can technology capture these parts of our memories, and should it?
Could libraries have their own servers to store and kind of manage local archives?
What if we turned social platforms for sharing images into publicly owned goods?
And most importantly, how are you going to remember today? Thank you.
Thank you.
I've been told if you have a question, you can just go up to the mic, I believe. So ask us your questions. We have 14 minutes.
We also appreciate it's the end of the day and the end of the festival. So. Oh, we have a brave person. Hello.
Hi.
Servers distributed around the world, including, I think, there's one in the Netherlands. Oh, there you go. Okay. There you go. So the Internet Archive or the Web Archive have servers distributed around the world. And the reason why I bring that up is because I think the most important thing, I like the idea of the libraries, because libraries are not very used at the moment. So I've faced digital legacy, and I do lots of work. But what I do is I distribute my stuff. So I have some stuff that's physically. I have some stuff that's on a local NAS. I know most people don't even have that. I also have stuff on the cloud. So I have these different options. I think the difficult thing right now is that a lot of the services kind of encourage you, press this button, upload it, it's going to be there forever. And if you read the terms and conditions, for example, of Facebook, so I even wrote down in my notes, if you're dead, that's one thing. If you're critically ill, there's a whole problem there. Like this, it becomes really difficult because you have to supply a death certificate. So it's not as simple as like, well, Facebook do this. And also a lot of the other platforms, for example, Dropbox, will not delete your account unless you have a death certificate. And the person, you have to have already said to a person that you allow them to delete your account before. So there's lots of stuff like that just is just sitting there. So my question really, is part of the process really about educating people about this stuff much earlier? Because that seems to be what's missing. And there was actually a talk just before, so I ran here, about digital legacy and death. So it was really interesting that they were like side by side.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'll take first part of your comment, and then maybe you can do the death bit.
Yeah.
So around like distributing your information everywhere. Sorry, I know that wasn't part of the question, but it's interesting because we met with the Flickr Foundation. And so they are a charity organization, part of the Flickr group, which is, one of the largest image storing websites in the world. And what they're trying to do is go through this process of, we have millions of photos saved on our website. What are we going to do with them? What's going to happen to them in 100 years' time? That's ultimately their mission and what they're trying to answer. Really interesting conversation with them where they're trying to say, okay, do we group all the photos to do with basketball and find a basketball-related sports association? And so if Flickr goes down, it's almost like a lifeboat scenario where all these photos are then shipped off to that other place. So they're going through a process now where they're trying to figure out what this lifeboat scenario looks like and how they can sort of decentralize and move around this incredible archive they've been able to curate unknowingly, but do it in a way that centers care and community and sort of collectiveness. Because, having all that stuff in one place, not the best kind of way of doing it. So I thought that might be of interest to you and other people. You can answer.
So on your question around the education, when it comes to death and online presence, I think yes, education, but also like the general public is everybody's going to die, but it's not something people want to think about. It's not something they want to be like. They need to, yes, but I also want to kind of push back on that and be like, well, these platforms were designed with no user experience of what it is like for someone whose partner, whose sibling, whose parent has passed away. Back in the day when Facebook was a thing, when it first was just like in Harvard Law, they never designed for that. So I think it was like in 2013 when there was like a shooting on a campus or something like that, where loads of people died, and all of these accounts now, people were messaging Facebook. They used to deal with it as a case-by-case basis. So they didn't really have a proper team. It was like, message us if someone dies, we'll deal with it for you. But then after that incident, they started to implement a team, and that's when they started looking at like legacies and things like that. But it's like the design after the aftermath of these things. So I think like it needs to be a platform thing, to be able, like, we can push for it, and there can be education in just general public of being like, this is what's happening. But the people who are experiencing it, it's, you know, up to them to kind of start that movement, and up to the platforms to actually design a user experience that is beneficiary for people who are going through grief, because it's very much an afterthought, which is quite sad. And it's like, it's in our life cycle, we are all going to die, but it's not something that anybody wants to think about. And I think that's kind of like where the rooted issue is. Does anybody else have a question? Oh my God.
Yeah, thank you so much for this interesting presentation and talk. I had 3 points I wanted to expand on whatever you were saying in your presentation. One thing was, one part of memories is its transience or evanescence, right? And I liked how you critically reflected on that point, talking about death and such like. One thing is willingly wanting memories to be forgotten or not being part of your future, for example. And why I critically, however, do endorse the third slide you presented of solutions, meaning public goods, if social media platforms should be public goods, is getting back control over whatever is known about you, hence your data, right? So I would love for you to expand on that point, maybe how we can also endorse data and hence memories to be forgotten, deleted, and such like. And the second point is, which I think reflected on the part of data centers and such like, maybe talking about the fetish of digitized memory creation, we have finite resources on this earth, right? And with each memory that is digitized, we also creating physical space and physical resources that has to be taken up. So maybe there must be some limit or some end on endlessly creating memories and uploading them online, and rather having more an ethical or sustainable approach about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In terms of like limiting the resources that we put into digital memory making, I think that we probably started from like the complete opposite space. We started from a space where we want this to be ever expanding, and it feels like you're trying to put Pandora's stuff back in the box after it's been opened. The same way I think that's happened with the rise of AI. Everyone's now worried about it after it's sort of been deployed and out in the world, and you're trying to grab everything back in to put it back into the box. But I don't think it's that simple. And instead, I think trying to create like new tracks of thought would be more interesting than trying to solve the platforms that we currently have. So for example, there was an experiment an artist once did where they made a social media platform where if you signed up your account, you could only post 10 things. 10 things, that's it, and then you're done. You couldn't post any more than that, but you had an expiry date where you couldn't post less than that. And so I think thinking about interesting ways where we limit ourselves and limit what we put online, I think is a way of approaching it. I just don't think our current platforms and the way they set up will ever encourage us to do that, because that's not what they want out of us. I think that needs like a new track of thinking in order to get us limited. But I do agree with that.
Just to go off that as well, I think like it needs to be, the platforms will never encourage it, but we're also seeing like loads of people kind of like drifting away from these platforms because of like, it's not good for your mental health, or you feel like it's toxic to be on these platforms. So I feel like that kind of trend is like a great place for people to hop onto, to be like, we should now limit this too. We recently did a project that looked at the impacts of AI systems specifically on the environment, but it links into data centers. Like, there's only so much land we can build a data center for. There's only so much water we can continuously use to cool them. There's going to be a point of no return, but like, why should we get there? So a huge part of our studio is also education. So educating the general public, whether it's like a talk that we give today or an exhibition or a piece of artwork, to try and get people to have an entry level into these topics, because not one person can create change. It's going to require, you know, a lot of people to create change. And then going off the kind of like ability to delete, this is something that, you know, we've spoken about for literally years. And one of the first things we came out as a studio was this idea of permanence. So we had a future manifesto of around like 7 ways we want our data to be treated in the future. And one of them was permanence, which is like, how can I have control of being able to pick and choose what's going to stay on my online profile? How can I delete things? And we're slowly seeing delete controls come in, but I just don't think it's fast enough. So it's around like hopping onto the trends that are currently people moving away from social media platforms and away from being online all the time, to start educating and creating general like spaces for general public, for people to learn, so that they can go onto that movement, to then pressurize. Because without pressure, the platforms are not going to do anything. The big tech companies aren't going to do anything. So they immensely need pressure from us.
Yeah, I would also just say, like, we know we have GDPR and the right to be forgotten and all that, but then there's also that like hidden data about yourself, the data self you never get to see, about how you're being labeled and how you're being treated, and all those adverts where they've been targeted. So there is some movement towards it, but it's not there yet. We have 3 minutes. It's all yours. If anyone else has any questions.
Go for it.
We'll be around after as well.
Yeah, we're not running
So
away.
we're not going to run away if you do want to grab us for a chat.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. As a photographer who also worked with archives, I found it very, very interesting. But I would like to maybe argue for not saving our digital memories, because I see this coming from an individualist approach, and I see archives as belonging to communities and curated by people, not just a collection of everything that was ever published. And yeah, I don't know if I have a point to make beyond that, other than I think moving towards a collective approach is much more important. And I want to connect this to how photography albums, for example, from 200 years ago or 100 years ago, they're all gone, or they're sold at flea markets, and the pictures have fallen off, and that is tragic, because we think of our existence as something that is forgotten, and that's tragic. But I don't think we should treat the digital memories differently than we treat the analog ones. And yeah, that's something that I wanted to add.
No, that's really interesting, and I agree on like maybe that radical question of like, why are we trying to save everything online? I think it's a very human to be forgotten. Like it's a part of life. The people that know you will also pass away. The people that knew them would also pass away. Like it's kind of like a natural trajectory to be forgotten. But I think with the use of online platforms, it's made people so obsessed to constantly post and to constantly have, and it's so easy that you're like, I'll take pictures of things and completely forget about them until I get reminded about it like years later, and I'm like, oh yeah, I did this thing and I did this thing, and it's like, how can we, having these big questions, I think is really important to kind of shape that conversation, because right now everybody is in an individualistic approach. We do see, like, as some of the examples I gave, like communities being come out of this, which I think is really great. But like, how do we move away from that individualistic approach and be a bit more like, okay, should we save everything? Yeah. Sorry, I know we have. Are we time?
We have time. Okay.
Oh, okay.
It's okay. You can sit back down if you want to. But no, I just think finally, I think basically the role of an archivist has to change. I don't think it can be this traditional hegemonic power that like controls who gets to see, and it's like kind of, it's very hierarchy in the ivory tower, and they get to decide what photos are kept and what isn't. I think that needs to be democratized like 100 times more, because there are so many voices 100 years ago with those photo albums who did decide what was and wasn't worthy, and that stems down from who's in power.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what has to shift, and that's why it is important to like value individual archives in a way, because for hundreds of years they've been forgotten because those people weren't seen as worthy enough. So I think there's a balance to be struck between individualism and who's the power in the room. But we'll stop now, because this is your last talk and you get to go home after this. No.
No,
We're
there's a
staying for the
closing
party.
thing. There's a closing thing.
But thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.